Yigit xurlangan, ayak asti qilingan, ezilgan shu xalqimning qo'llarini suygim bor mening. Feryadim osmon felek to'kilgachga qon selda, ejderhanın aksidim vatanimni olg'im bor mening. Afg'on Uyg'urman, vatan qo'ldan hargiz ketmagay. Ay yıldız ayrılığım, gökyüzüne bir gün bor mening.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome to a very special episode of Talk is Turkestan. We have some very special guests joining us today. We've got Drew Pavlou, leader of the Democratic Alliance, and we also have Adila. How are you? Today we'll be talking about this new party of theirs that's happening that's been started in Australia. And what's interesting about this is the reason why we've got them on the show to talk about an Australian political party is because we have some Uyghurs involved. To my knowledge, at least in Australian history, we haven't had Uyghurs in any sort of political party ever. So we have Adila, and we've also now been joined by Inty as well.
Hi.
Welcome.
Sorry I'm late.
No, that's fine. No, you're right on time. First of all, I want, and any of you guys can chime in on any of this. If you could basically start off with what the Democratic Alliance is. Drew, if you could start us off there, and then I'll slowly get to be honest, even though I'm Australian, I'm not really I'm not well read on the Australian political system, how it all works, but just sort of tell us what the party is and then what stage you guys are at. And then hopefully, Adila, what is your plan? And Inty, what is your plan in this basically?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Aslan. Man, so basically what's been happening over the past few years when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party infiltration in Australian politics, we've seen how so many politicians in both the major parties, both Labor and the Liberal Party, have taken huge donations from Chinese billionaires, from Chinese government-linked bodies. And we don't call them donations, they're basically bribes. And as a result of this economic, as a result of this effective economic bribery, major political parties in both major political parties in Australia have refused to really speak out about the terrible crimes that the Chinese Communist Party has been perpetrating against the Uyghur people, the Tibetans, the Hong Kongers, ordinary Chinese people who are persecuted brutally, religious groups, Christians, Muslims, Falun Gong. The Australian political class does not want to talk about these terrible human rights abuses and crimes because they're so beholden to these huge Chinese government donors, all this money coming in to Australia from China, and we're really fed up about that. We want to have some change. We want human rights to be put before blood money. We think that when the question is whether China should be Australia's closest trading partner, well, people who've been directly impacted. So, for example, my Uyghur friends here. People who have family members who've been persecuted by the Chinese government, people who have had family members tortured by this government, who have family members who've been incarcerated in concentration camps by this government. These are the voices we should be listening to when the question is about whether Australia should have China as its closest economic trading partner. And so we are a voice basically for humanity, where unfortunately huge corporations in Australia, very, very vested political and economic interests don't want to talk about these problems because they take so much money from China and they benefit from the status quo. We're not people that benefit from the status quo. We're starting off with nothing. We're just basically people who have been united by the Chinese government's persecution. You know, obviously the Uyghur community in Adelaide, they've had intimidation for a long time. They've been facing intimidation by the Chinese government. There have been people who the Chinese government has actually tried to recruit Uyghurs in Adelaide as intelligence agents to inform on other Uyghurs. The Chinese consulate in Adelaide has been expanded to include dozens of consular officials and diplomats, basically because Adelaide is the center of the Uyghur community in Australia. And the Chinese government basically has expanded the compound in Adelaide, in the seat of Sturt, which Inty is running in. They've expanded that consulate basically to spy on Uyghurs and spy on the Australian shipbuilding defense industry in Adelaide. And both major parties allowed that to happen. So we've seen huge sectors of the Australian economy. We've seen members of parliament. We've seen institutions like the universities, which is what I battled firsthand. They've been corrupted by the Chinese Communist Party's economic coercion, their economic heft, and we're a voice for humanitarianism. We're a voice for human rights. The thing that links us, despite our differences in religion and background, is simply the fact that we believe that all human beings deserve the same rights, that all human beings are worthy of dignity and respect, and that all people should be free of persecution. And that is a thing that links us. And the members of our party, whether they be our Uyghur members, Adila and Inty, whether they be our Hong Konger candidate Max Mock, who is running against the CCP-linked LNP MP Gladys Liu in Chisholm, Victoria, or whether it be our Tibetan candidates, they have all been on the front line when it comes to opposing the Chinese government influence. They've all been faced firsthand intimidation. They have all firsthand faced the bullying of the Chinese government, and that's what has linked us. And we're creating this multicultural alliance, the Democratic Alliance, and it's a grouping of people who just have human rights at the center of everything that they're trying to do. And we don't have big money behind us. It's a grassroots movement. We've got 2,100 members Australia-wide. For example, the Greens have 15,000 members. They've been around for more than 10 years. They've ran in all these elections, spent millions of dollars. 15,000 members nationwide. We've got 2,000 in 3 months with no money behind us, no big backing behind us. It's just people it's just real, authentic people without big vested interest behind us who want democratic change. They want to improve the world. They want to improve the community. And we're not just a party that's just focused on China. It's very important to us that we rebuild Australian manufacturing, rebuild the Australian working classes, basically return power to people and communities that have been ignored by Canberra. Because at the end of the day, it's the same issue with CCP interference. It's people putting greed and money before, the valuing human life, valuing human dignity. And unfortunately, democracy in Australia has become very corrupted. Vested interests control it. And we want to return democracy back to the people. We want to give more power back to communities, families, working class people. We want to support small business. We want to go up against the big vested interests, the oligopoly, the oligarchs, the CCP, stooges, all these powerful interests. We're going up against them just as young people who are united by a shared dream for a better world. And that's the vision for the Democratic Alliance, a global movement to fight against authoritarianism.
Well, you guys truly are the underdogs here, but off to a great start, as you mentioned, 2,000 members within just a few months. I'd like to welcome Adila Yarmuhammad to the show, and basically talk about your involvement, how you got involved with the whole project. Obviously, through activism, now you've gotten to a stage where you can act on a political level within Australia. Could you tell us about your involvement within the Democratic Alliance?
Yeah, of course. And first of all, thank you so much, Aslam Nakash, for having us here today. Very excited. I met Drew earlier this year when he had all the dramas at his university. I reached out and kind of expressed our gratitude, being like, wow, there is someone out there who would do the work, and they're not Uyghur. And it was really it was a shock to our Adelaide community as well. And then we kind of got chatting, and then I think the biggest step towards my involvement with Drew was basically when the Vice Chancellor of University of Queensland, Peter Hoy, was hired as the Vice Chancellor of my university that I go to, Adelaide University. And then with that, it just erupted with protests. And then Drew drove all the way down to Adelaide with a couple of his mates from
4,000
Brisbane.
kilometers.
Yeah, like a long time. And, you know,
Yeah.
we helped him get places to stay. He stayed at my grandparents' house for a few nights. You know, we hosted them, and we kind of, it was just like it was really nice to see someone else stepping up, who wasn't Uyghur, who didn't really have, the only connection that he had with our cause was that he was, you know, punished by his university. And instead of, you know, just sitting down silently and just, you know, letting money take over, he thought, no, this is wrong, and I should do something, say something. And then with that, we went to Canberra together with one of the other Uyghur boys in Adelaide, Nasrullah, and a couple of other of our Democratic Alliance members, to kind of lobby with some politicians and talk to them. And that went well. And then, well, here we are. And Drew asked me if I'd like to run, and I haven't even finished university, neither has Drew. We don't have a lot of experience in this sort of field. I do study international relations, so I do have like a little bit of a political background. But I guess, you know, he just asked, and I thought it was a good opportunity. And I talked to my parents about it, and they were a little bit nervous, but there we go.
Let me say one thing though. You say you don't have that much political experience, Adila, but to be honest, just the fact that you have been an activist for more than 10 years, your very existence has been political, because like being a Uyghur has been criminalized by the Chinese government. And so your existence has been political. And so you've had this experience fighting against the Chinese government and facing an intimidation in a way that, like, you know, no politicians in Australian Parliament really actually understand. Like, what dissidents?
That's definitely true.
Like, in the Australian Parliament, what dissidents do we have? Who in the Australian Parliament, you know, has actually been willing to put their life on the line for what they believe in? Very, very few. Because most of the people in the Australian Parliament who are representing either Labor, Liberal, Greens, you know, they go through the major parties. Like, they join up when they're young person at the universities. They do shit in politics. They become a staffer for the parties. You know, they work for the parties their entire lives, and then they get parachuted in. And oftentimes they've never had any sort of experience in the real world actually fighting for something they believe in. So people might say, oh, you guys are inexperienced, you're young. You haven't necessarily, you know, run your own businesses. You haven't necessarily, you know, you haven't, you know, run before, etc. But look, like,
we have life experience. A lot of us,
everyone here has faced persecution by the Chinese government, have actually really put their safety on the line to go up against this government in a very public way. And that's an experience that very, very few in Australian politics, in Labor, Liberals, or the Greens, could ever really relate to, because they're all in there, you know, as careerists. They want to, you know, have their career in politics. They're never going to, you know, sacrifice their career on an issue of principle. Whereas, like, all four of us, we've all basically, you know, we've put our money where our mouth is. We fought the Chinese government. These were issues of principle for us, and we wouldn't back down. So yeah, people may say inexperience, and in fact, I'm like, no, our experience is something that no one in the Parliament can actually match.
So true.
Yeah.
Thanks, Drew. I think what Drew does a lot is sometimes being Uyghur, and I'm sure a lot of us can relate, is we don't even realize that, you know, existence is resistance towards the Chinese Communist Party. Exactly. And, you know, yeah, we were born as activists. I mean, my first protest, I was 6 months old, and my parents drove me to Melbourne, and we had a protest. And then ever since then, it's just like almost every couple of months, protest. I did my first speech at 13 years old, and I was, you know, anxiety ridden. But then here I am, and, you know, live streaming and talking to other politicians and talking to other journalists and talking about just my existence. And I think, yeah, it's a big thing, because a lot of us don't realize how important it is for us to do this. And then, you know, people like Drew kind of, you know, snap us back into reality, and it's like, no, actually, so other people don't have this experience that you've had. Other people don't understand it. So it's nice to hear things from Drew like that every now and then.
I'm a bit of a hype man sometimes, but I truly mean it though. I truly mean it.
For those that don't understand here, what we're trying to say here is that the mere fact that Uyghurs are even born because China does have a one-child policy, two-child policy, and talking to former concentration camp detainees or talking to people that have actually carried out those abortions, it's, you know, having a Uyghur, even simply having a Uyghur marriage or a Uyghur wedding in itself is a protest, because we have seen and we've seen the videos where Uyghur women are forced to marry with Chinese, especially soldiers, because they are seen as a bounty. So I'll have now Miss Inty Elham to talk about her involvement with the Democratic Alliance and what you hope to achieve through this.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, my screen just froze for a second.
It's okay.
You guys good?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I see you now. I see you now.
You see me? My screen just froze.
Oh, it's perfect now.
No,
It's perfect.
it's all good. Yeah, I never saw myself going into politics, to be honest. However, I've also, like all the Uyghurs, I've also been a human rights advocate for the Uyghur cause for a long time, and obviously very passionate about justice and speaking out, you know, a voice for the voiceless, that kind of thing. But yeah, I think when Drew asked me early in the year, I run my own business, by the way. I'm a chiropractor, actually. So I have a very science background as well. But yeah, when Drew asked me, I was a bit busy with, you know, my business, but also doing human rights work with other organizations. So I sort of kind of, and I just was like, I'm a good politician. Like it's a scary thought, you know. You hear a lot about the politics world. But yeah, I kind of thought about it over a couple months, and time went by, and then I had an epiphany, and I just thought, no, you know what? I think I should do this. I think I should be a part of, you know, the party and help strengthen democracy in Australia, and, you know, anti-CCP and that kind of thing. And so yeah, I'm really excited to be now part of it. Yeah, that's how I kind of got into it. But yeah, I also met Drew earlier in the year when he came down to Adelaide as well, and yeah, ever since then, kind of kept contact.
And with your seat, Inty, you're running in Sturt, which is where they have built this new Chinese consulate compound, and Sturt as well is where, you know, probably the largest portion of the Uyghur community in Adelaide lies. So I mean, it's so suspicious that the Chinese consulate they expand this massive consulate right here, and so obviously that will be a really important part of the campaign.
100%. And the thing is, there's already a Chinese consulate in the city. It's like, why did they have to build another massive one right next to, by the way, where all the, you know, Australia's defense technologies are as well? So it's also a threat to every Australian, not just Uyghurs. And that's what I'm going to also speak a lot about and advocate for as well. So yeah.
That's very strange, because you've only got, say, when we talk about the US presence in Australia, you've got like one in Perth, one in Melbourne, and one in Sydney. There's not one in Adelaide, as far as I know. So yeah, for those, and any of you guys can chime in on this one. For those who don't really understand the relationship between China and Australia, I mean, how far or how much influence does the Chinese do the Chinese have on the Australian government? When I'm talking about the Chinese Communist Party here.
It's incredible. I think like, so for example, even just a couple of years ago, and people often try to say this, they say, oh, the Liberal government, they're so strong on China, etc., because Scott Morrison goes out and, you know, he sometimes makes tough statements. But, you know, just a couple of years ago, it was the Liberal government that signed an Australia-China free trade agreement. It was the Liberal government that signed off on the sale of the Port of Darwin, a key strategic port asset of Australia's, to the Chinese government, to a Chinese state-owned company. So that's just basically selling off key national security infrastructure to a government to a dictatorship that does not that does not respect our democracy. And it was also the Liberal government just a few years ago as well. And this was a push that was championed by Julie Bishop. They were trying to push for an extradition treaty to China. And, you know, that is what Hong Kong, you know, we watched Hong Kong go up in flames because young people our age were fighting on the streets, willing to put their lives on the line, trying to fight against an extradition treaty to China, because they know that if anyone is extradited to the Chinese mainland, there is no such thing as actual equal justice. There's no such thing as the rule of law. There's no such thing as a fair trial. If you're extradited to the Chinese mainland, the judicial system is completely controlled by the party, and you can never get a fair trial there. And so people in Hong Kong were putting their lives on the line to try and fight against that. It was an existential struggle for them. And just a few years ago, you know, key members of the Liberal Party, including Julie Bishop, who was the foreign minister, she was actually pushing for an extradition treaty with China, as though it was just, you know, as though it was just this, you know, completely ordinary thing. And it's crazy because if there had been an extradition treaty with China, I wonder if we'd even be having this conversation right now over the podcast. I wonder if you know, Adila, Inty, and myself would even be around, you know, if there had been an extradition treaty with China, because the Chinese government basically condemned me as a terrorist and said I was a separatist, which is like a death penalty offense in China. My friend Max Mock, who is also running in Chisholm against Gladys Liu, he was called a terrorist by Chinese state media, and they basically called him a race traitor. They called him, separatist, terrorist. And Adila and Inty, just by being vocal Uyghurs, I mean, like, you know, they would be technically breaching those ridiculous laws in China, the separatist laws, which basically make it a death penalty offense to even advocate for, you know, self-determination, you know, just for the basic rights of the language and the culture to be respected. I mean, that's a death penalty offense in China. So I'm wondering whether we would even be having this podcast interview right now if just 3-4 years ago, the Liberal Party had been successful in getting that extradition treaty with China. So that's the extent of Chinese government influence in Australia. We've got Gladys Liu, as I just mentioned previously. She's a Liberal Party member of Parliament in Chisholm, Melbourne. She was actually investigated by ASIO prior to entering the Parliament because of her links to Chinese government United Front operations. She was photographed next to a man who ultimately ended up dead in a man in Melbourne who ultimately ended up dead in a hotel room after he revealed that a Chinese businessman had offered him $1 million to run for Parliament and infiltrate the Parliament. This guy basically revealed to the world that he was being cultivated as a spy by Chinese government interests, and then he winded up dead in a Melbourne hotel room. And Gladys Liu has all these photos just grinning next to him. I mean, that's the level we're at. We've got members of the Parliament, Gladys Liu, members of the Liberal government, who have United Front Chinese Communist Party links, have been investigated by ASIO for the Chinese Communist Party links. When she was interviewed just a year and a half ago, she refused to say that Xi Jinping was a dictator. She said that, oh, well, I can't call him a dictator. He's an elected chairman in this system. And I mean, like, how does that, you know, sit with you, Inty and Adila, as Uyghurs who have literally, you know, known family members who've been tortured, who've been persecuted? I know, Adila, like, you've got cousins in Adelaide whose parents have scars down their arms and stuff like that from Chinese tiger chairs. And so when you hear Gladys Liu, a member of the Liberal government who the Prime Minister Scott Morrison was campaigning with him last week, he was out in Melbourne on the streets of Melbourne campaigning with Gladys Liu. How do you feel when you see the Prime Minister hanging out with an MP who says, oh, well, Xi Jinping's an elected chairman, he's not a dictator? I mean, it's sickening.
It's scary. And then also to like link back to Arslan's question about Chinese interference in Australian politics, is scary. Like, I was born here and I was raised here, and even now there are some times where I can't. I don't know if even my safety is guaranteed. I don't even know if maybe if I go out, like people taking photos of me or people following me. I remember when the Hong Konger protest started a couple of years ago. I joined one at the Adelaide at the University of South Australia, and it was massive. And then I did a speech there, and some Hong Kongers approached me after, and they were like, just watch out, because you know, people might follow you, people might take your photos and spread some stuff about you. And that was the first time it kind of hit me. I was like, oh, okay, like I'm now coming in front of this on stage, I'm in front of people know who I am. Even to send photos to overseas to our own family members, it's scary, it's hard. We've lost all contact with everyone. A couple of years ago, a couple of my uncles and aunties would call up my parents, be like, oh, you haven't spoken to us in a couple of days, where'd you guys go? And now it's like they've blocked us all, and they refuse to even talk. And It's just like the small things like that, and to hear a politician with Scott Morrison, our prime minister, you know, saying things like that, you know, having these ties with the Communist Party, who was making me fear my own life in Australia. It's scary. It's almost as if like, where can I be safe anymore? We were born here. I can't even be born in be safe in Australia.
Exactly. Exactly. That's what we're confronting. It's like if Australia's no longer safe, where's safe for us?
Yeah, it's scary how China can reach their hands out, you know, to Australia. I remember I was also at a protest, and you could obviously tell a CCP spy. My friends saw that they were pretending to take a selfie, but they were zooming up on like my face, which was like, that's when it really hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, like they're also here as well, like right next to us, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I've seen that at so many different rallies, like people taking, like I've seen that at Hong Kong rallies, like people there in the crowd who are surveilling Hong Kongers there and taking photos of people's faces to be used for contacting people's families back home.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
Now, obviously, you can't run a political campaign simply based on human rights and basically criticizing the Chinese Communist Party. How do you convince everyday Australians that, you know, who are worried, you know, your everyday Australian that has links, financial links, economic links that make their daily bread from dealing with China? How do you convince them to sort of let go of that? And what are you offering those everyday Australians? Because you can't just be the Chinese government's doing this to Tibetans and Uyghurs each and every day. At the end, your party has to serve Australia. At least that's the sort of message you're going to give. And anyone can chime in on that.
Yeah, of course. Our political party is first and foremost about, you know, serving the Australian people. And it's all about basically, because I think the very important thing is that these issues are very much interconnected with one another. So, for example, and Max Mock, our Hong Kong Australian candidate in Melbourne, he made this very good point the other day. And it was about corruption in Australian politics. As some of the viewers may be aware, the former Attorney General Christian Porter recently was in the headlines for taking $1 million in an anonymous blind trust. So he doesn't even necessarily, he has said to Parliament, he doesn't actually know who donated $1 million to him. And he just took that money. And Max Mock made the very good point. Well, you know, if that's acceptable, then what would stop, say, Gladys Liu from doing the same, taking $1 million in an anonymous blind trust from Chinese government sources to undermine Australian democracy? So what we will be trying to show people is actually these issues are very, very much interconnected. It's all about the fact, I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about a corrupt elite that is selling out ordinary people. And that goes to the heart of the matter across the entire economy. It's not just China. It's more broadly just about the fact that it used to be possible to support people based on a working class wage, and now families are going hungry. We've got 1 million Australians who are working poor in this country, so they're working full time, and yet they're still below the poverty line. Last year in Australia, we had 1 million children go hungry, and the crazy thing is, for a brief period of 6 months, when the government basically gave out about $15 billion in coronavirus supplements to people on welfare and stuff like that, we effectively eliminated poverty in Australia. Basically, those statistics regarding child hunger, those statistics about the working poor, those statistics about people, you know, suffering and unable to basically provide for their basic living standards, they were eliminated overnight. I mean, we basically eliminated poverty overnight in Australia, and we were providing housing to homeless people during the pandemic because the governments didn't want them on the streets to spread the virus. So they were giving homeless Australians hotel rooms and things like that. So basically, for the first 6 months of the pandemic, we eliminated homelessness in Australia. We eliminated poverty in Australia. We eliminated child hunger in Australia. We lifted people below the poverty line up into a decent standard of living. And we had this for 6 months. And then the government decided to drop the subsidies. The government decided to no longer support people who were in need. And all those people dropped back down into poverty. Those children went back into hunger. Those working class families went back to conditions where they could no longer provide for their own families. And the government said this was necessary because, you know, you've got to balance the budget. We're running out of money as a country. Well, they handed out billions and billions of dollars to corporations that never needed it. They gave out $200 million to Crown Casino, which was in the headlines for allowing Xi Jinping's cousin to money launder. Like, Xi Jinping's cousin was one of the top high rollers at Crown Casino, and they'd personally fly him in on jets, and he'd spend millions of dollars at Crown Casino in like a weekend. He was one of their top VIP customers. The Australian government gave $200 million to Crown Casino in the form of JobKeeper subsidies. And then what did Crown Casino go around and do? You know, they were about to give the top shareholder, James Packer, the billionaire, they were about to give him, you know, an $80 million, $90 million dividend. So this was basically effectively socialism for the rich, corporate welfare for the rich, huge government transfers to the rich, billions of dollars in subsidies to the rich. And for 6 months, we lifted people out of poverty, we lifted people out of homelessness, we lifted people out of hunger. And the government decided to plunge them back into hunger and poverty and inequality and this terrible malaise, while they gave billions and billions of dollars to billionaires who didn't need it. And they did that because the billionaires are the ones who pay their wages, who pay the donations. And the thing that we can offer to Australian people is with us. So, for example, I had, like last week, I had $23 in my bank account. I don't own a home. I don't own, you know, big assets. I don't have a share portfolio. I don't have shares in Chinese companies. I don't have shares in, you know, companies doing trade with China. I don't have to take billions of dollars from Gina Rinehart and billions of dollars from Clive Palmer. I'm just an ordinary person. I've never really made any money out of what I've been doing over the past 2.5 years. When I did raise money, I mostly donated most of it away to, you know, Shuka Foundation in Adelaide, which was supporting Uyghur orphans in Turkey, Amnesty International, which was doing human rights work in China. Like, money doesn't motivate me. I still do most of this without really any stable income or stable wage or anything. I just really passionately believe in this cause. It's what I want to devote my entire life to. I already showed people that I'd never back down because the Chinese government went after me. They had death threats to my family. I got thrown out of the University of Queensland. I almost lost my entire future, my education. My family were terrified when they were receiving death threats. They didn't want me to live at home. I almost lost all my friends. Man, I almost lost everything in my life that I held dear. And still, under all that pressure, and even at one point in the University of Queensland, when they brought in $500,000 worth of lawyers, when they brought in the best law firms in Australia trying to destroy me, and they, even at one point, they were threatening me with contempt of court proceedings, which carry a 3-year prison sentence. Never once did I back down. There was never a point where they could have bought me out. There was never a point where they could have silenced me through intimidation, bullying. I just kept going. And right now, you know, I was like, I want to run in politics. No one's going to accept us, so we'll make our own party. We needed 500 members to form a political party. And then overnight, the government lifted it to 1,500 to make it harder for smaller parties. Nevertheless, just kept going. I went out to the Australian Electoral Commission offices, and basically 9 to 5 for 3 weeks, I would enter every single member we had in the party out of our 1,500 members, enter line by line. And Adila did this too in Adelaide, you know, line by line, we're adding people's names into the Australian Electoral Commission computers, checking every single person was an Australian citizen. You know, like, that's the type of slog, hard work we were doing behind the scenes. You know, people might go, oh, you're on 60 Minutes, you're doing it for all for the glamour. Nah, most of the time it's just slog and, you know, just grinding in the back room, you know, get no money out of it. You know, it's not really rewarding when you're just doing data entry, and you're getting threats from the Chinese government and stuff, but just kept going because this is what I believe in with all my heart. And so that's what we offer to the Australian people. We're not taking Chinese money. We're not taking billionaire money. We're just real, authentic young people that we don't have a stake in the economy, so they can't buy us off. It's like, we can be as radical as we like. Like, it's not like we have billion-dollar interests in Chinese government firms, so we can say, let's boycott the Chinese government over genocide. We don't have economic interests that they can hold over us.
I like to get Adila or either Inty into the conversation.
Of course.
No, that's fine.
I love you speaking.
Yeah, obviously there's been a lot of slog and a lot of grinding behind the scenes. What's it now going to take to actually get that Australian vote and get you guys into Senate?
Sorry, just quickly following your previous question, Aslan. I just wanted to add that, you know, Australia, we pride ourselves in being so multicultural and, you know, multiculturalism and all this stuff, and we are that. But, you know, is that reflected in Parliament? Like, I certainly haven't seen that kind of representation, and I think that we are everyday Australians wanting to represent everyday Australians, and people can relate to everyday people that are not like career politicians, if that makes sense. So I want Australia to know that as well.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I mean, like, for example, Adila is the youngest Muslim woman to ever run for parliament. Inty and Adila as a pair are the first Uyghurs, we think, in the entire world to run in a democratic election, at least in the West. And it's like, why hasn't that happened before? And it's just, unfortunately, the major parties, like, sometimes they say that they support the multiculturalism in the parliament and stuff like that, but their actions are very, very rarely reflected. I mean, they just continue to select their insiders after cycle after cycle after cycle. Because, to even get to be pre-selected for Labor or the Liberal Party, you have to be a slave to the major party for 20, 30 years, before they select you. And so when they get in, they're all just drones. They all think the exact same. And it's like, what happened to, just putting ordinary people into parliament to represent ordinary people, not the huge interests, not the party machines, not the billionaires. Like we are real, authentic people. We fuck up. We make mistakes as well. We're not polished. We're just ordinary people. And that's what people will respect, because people want change in Australian politics. Nothing has changed for so long. It's like, well, if you keep voting for the same people, then of course we won't get change. We've got to do something differently.
And power is in the people.
Exactly. Power is in the people. And we are trying to present something new that hasn't been done in Australian politics before. So that's the message. If you want things to stay the same, keep voting with the same politicians as always. But if you want something different, then try people who are starting with nothing behind them. It's just their passion for genuine humanitarian causes. They can't be bought off. They can't be bullied into silence. We're real people, and you can actually back us to be fighters, because our entire lives we've been fighters.
And the passion to strengthen the democracy in Australia.
Yeah, exactly.
Adila, I'd like you to get in on the conversation. What are your thoughts on this issue? What's it going to take to now sort of get that vote in, and what's the next process now? You guys are officially a party. What's next?
Not officially a party yet.
Not officially yet.
Not officially a party.
Yeah. So
Almost,
it's a 3-month
almost.
Yeah, inshallah. It's a 3-month minimum process, and so you get 1,500 members, then submit, and then it's 3-month legal minimum. And so we've got 1,500 we've submitted, and we think we should pass through all those hoops. But it is just like you just jump through the hoops. They make it very hard to get registered. But even if we don't get registered, we're all running as independents anyway. We're so committed to.
Definitely. And to answer your question, I guess now the thing is just talking to people, going out there, because Insan and I live in the same cities, working together, talking to people and trying to, not just talk about our own experiences as Uyghurs living in Australia, not just talking about, the experiences that Uyghurs and Tibetans and Hong Kongers are experiencing in China and the occupied lands. Talking about, everyday Australian issues, climate change, homelessness, indigenous rights, and things like that impacts everyday Australians, that everyday Australians, that issues that are in our country now, in the land that we're on now, that we need to kind of address before we go off and do other things too. So I think one of the most important things is just talking to people, explaining, and getting the things out there, talking about what's going on in the world, and just not even just about the Uyghur issue, but a lot about the rest of the world.
Definitely. Never doubt the power of an idea whose time has come. And honestly, once we are out there speaking on the streets to ordinary people and telling them our stories and telling them our stories, telling them our vision for the country, I think we will get an unstoppable momentum, because this is genuinely something that hasn't been done in Australian politics before, and people are crying out for change.
Well, brothers and sisters, for those in Australia and whoever wants to get involved, make sure you go and check out drewpavlou.com. It's where you can join the party, volunteer, and sort of read up on what the party is all about, their petitions, and also if you want to donate. Is there anything else that you guys? Yeah.
Oh, we will have a proper website for Adila and Inty. We haven't been able to properly, because starting off to get web designer and stuff, it's expensive. So we're really in the sort of starting stages. We're hopefully going to have a page for Adila and Inty this week. We'll have a full party page this week. And we are getting momentum. We've actually had $10,000 in donations since 60 Minutes last week. we've had like hundreds of people reach out wanting to volunteer and stuff. So yeah, you know, at the moment we've got drewpavlou.com, and you can go there if you're an Australian citizen to join up or donate. You have to be an Australian citizen because the laws in Australia are very, very strict. They changed them to basically ban all foreign donations to try and ban CCP stuff. So they've got very strict laws, but if you're an Australian citizen, you can join up. That said, though, yeah, we will have Inty's page, we'll have Adila's page up soon.
So you can't be a Chinese citizen and sort of take part in the Australian election process?
No, you can as long as you're an Australian citizen, but you've got to be an Australian citizen, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, guys. Is there anything else that you would like to add, Adila and Inty?
No, just thank you so much, and all the work that you do as well, Arsanaka. It's quite inspiring, you know, and growing up, seeing how the Uyghur cause is being talked about in the media, how there's so many activists now speaking up, not just Uyghurs, people like Drew. It's inspirational, and I think, you know, change is coming.
Change is coming, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for hosting us and letting us speak about our party.
Yeah,
it's
no,
just it's just started.
No, it's definitely an honor for me. I mean, for anybody that, I mean, we've had Drew on twice before, so you guys can go head over to our channel on Talkies Turkestan and see those 2 episodes. I sort of felt that, Drew, you were going to go into the political arena. I did feel that you were hiding it back then, but you said no, you had no intention.
To be honest, I actually wasn't hiding it back then. I literally, the crazy
just decided.
Yeah. The crazy thing is I never really had a plan. I mean, I just got punched at that one protest and I just kept going. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep trying. I never had a plan, and I never really thought, oh, I'd run independent. Honestly, yeah, man, when we were talking last year, I never had that intention in mind. Like, I did probably think, oh, yeah, no, one day I would love to be part of politics, but I never actually thought, oh, the next election, we're going to have an independent party. I'm going to run with a deal and stuff. Like, we didn't have that plan, you know, that hadn't even crossed my mind. So it is crazy to think, you know, how much things have changed just in, you know, just in the time as well that where I've known you, Arslan, and, you know, you had me on when I was getting expelled. Things have changed a lot. And it's like, I think it's testament, you know, if you just keep striving, keep trying your hardest, and you keep working and grinding, it will pay off.
All right.
Definitely.
Right. Awesome. Okay, guys, thank you guys so much. Thank you to everyone that's been listening. Make sure you guys like, share, and subscribe. Get the word out there. Support the Democratic Alliance. And until next time, make sure Adila, Inty, and Drew don't go away. I'm going to just close out with a video, and then I'll say goodbye separately to you guys.
Cool.
Everybody, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ümit üzme aziz halqim, ümit üzme ey ana yurt. Biz atlandık bu güreşke, o yıldaştek uyuşup. Allah verse bu nusretni,